Jim, let's get one more question before we go back to a review of the AEW biography show. This was sent in on the official Cult of Cornette Facebook group by Jack Rutherford. Why didn't the Barbarian get a decent push anywhere? He was a powerhouse, and yeah, he looked like a road warrior, but it just seems like he didn't get a real push until the Powers of Pain. Then Vince got them, split them up, and then antlers. Why rib the guy? No title runs, low-profile feuds, stuck in Paul Jones's freak show. Why? Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you. Barb was a great guy, and Barb was an incredible physical specimen, and he looked like a monster heel, but he couldn't talk. And he has, if anybody's ever spoken to him, he has a really thick accent to begin with. It had in those days and still has to some extent. And
I love him in Body Slam.
Yeah, well, that's what,
Are you Smerrick? That's his voice.
That's when he got in trouble out there, because once he was away from home, he imbibed a little too much at the hotel bar, and they had to fly Saney in to fucking get him out of jail. He ate the cop's mace and headbutted the police car. But anyway, but that was the thing and unfortunately, he also, a lot of people don't think of him as being a guy who got, jacked around by the loss of the territories, but that's another thing that happened because, I can't remember when he first started, but he wasn't really used in a prominent position till the early 80s, right? And he had a few spots in a decent territory, but basically it came to, where was he right before he went to work for Crockett? Georgia?
He was, before he went to work for Crockett, remember he had been in Memphis, he had been in Georgia. He was in Mid-South was he there for your debut TV taping?
He may have been.
Conga?
See, he had so many different names. He was Conga the Barbarian, and then he was the Barbarian, then he was King Tonga, wasn't he? Or was that Haku?
Haku was King Tonga.
But even though Barbarian is from Tonga.
Right.
See, that's the problem. So, point is, he was fairly new and fairly green until the early 80s. And then he had a run of the territories that we just mentioned. And yes, he did have a nice run in 84 right after I left in Memphis. And then he was in Paul Jones's army. And that's the thing. He needed a manager because he couldn't talk. He could fulfill the athletic part and look like a wild beast. But then the problem became, everybody that got put in Paul Jones's army in Dusty's time period there, the fans knew that they were the mid-card group. And then
why slot him in there right away, though? That's, I guess, part of the question.
I don't know. Abundance of riches, had a great roster, whatever the case.
Of all the people for him to work with, Jimmy Valiant?
I know. But and obviously I just spoke well of Jimmy Valiant earlier in the show, but this is 10 years after that, and Jimmy was already in his, how old would he have been at that point? Jesus, old enough, mid-40s. And it was a different gimmick. So he wasn't going to be bumping around a lot for the Barbarian, one of the strongest, toughest, baddest guys legitimately in the fucking business. But Barb was a nice guy out of the ring, too. And that was the thing. He was a nice guy. And then when the Powers of Pain, they were put together with Warlord, was the same thing. He was a well-spoken, nice guy, but wasn't a great promo, but looked like he was chiseled out of granite. But I've mentioned before that Dusty almost a lot of times, except with the Horsemen and the Midnight Express, Dusty did the same thing with the Road Warriors that Vince tried to do with all of his top guys. Go for the giant against the giant, the monster against the monster. And if you go back and notice, the Road Warriors drew their biggest money against smaller heels with more heat rather than big guys that looked like they could match up to him physically. Because the theory behind that was, well, if the people love the Road Warriors and their baby faces, we've got to find guys that look like they can beat them and get sympathy on them and make them the baby face. But it still didn't work. They just didn't really like seeing the Road Warriors against guys that were as big as they were. When the Road Warriors were against guys that were smaller than they were, whereas the Freebirds or the Midnight or Tully and Arn, Steve Regal and Jimmy Garvin in the AWA, young, smaller guys with big mouths and heat, the people love to see the Road Warriors beat them up. And that's where the lasting memories seem to come from with the Road Warriors. So they tried to push Barb in the Powers of Pain along with Wardlow.
The love child of the Barbarian and the Warlord. Wardlow.
There you go. And no wonder he's so attached to his hair. But then they, and they did the bench press angle, but it wasn't setting the world on fire at the box office, the program between these two teams, because the people, it just didn't click. And Paul Jones was not a manager that needed to be put in that position at that point in time. And then Dusty booked him in the scaffold matches. And Warlord and Barbarian both looked and said, well, fuck, we're fucking 300 pounds apiece. We'll break both our fucking legs. And so they migrated north. And that, again, Vince took two monsters, but that tag team was limited because Warlord was still green at that point and never under the best circumstances was a guy that was taking backdrops and providing a lot of action at that size. Barbarian could move like crazy for his size, but if he's the cat-like quick one of the team, and they couldn't talk. And then there was no play. He had been one place, and I think he went back to WCW mid-90s, right? Then they were
Haku, the Faces of Fear.
Yeah, but then they were so full of talent at that point. And, so there it was. That was his window of opportunity. There was just not a lot of places to work.
If only he had been given a different manager, who knows what his career would have been. But I think you're right. Once you put him with Paul Jones, even though Paul Jones got sillier as the years went on, he was there with Paul Jones from 85 to 88?
Yeah.
How do you recover from that?
And see, the thing is, in the Carolinas, it was a little bit different because Paul Jones had been such a major name wrestling there. But when we went to new markets, and they just judged by what they were seeing on television at that time, no, it didn't work.